Didn't think that through. So thanks all for giving up your Saturday. Hope you decide it's worth it and stay the whole day. I'll start off with what we've got planned for the day. So first of all, that's me. I'll run through an introductory talk. We've then got Michael Ridland at the back, who most of you will probably know in the blue shirt, who will be going through cross-platform UI and looking at Xamarin Forms. And we've then got Glenn Stevens also at the back, waving, who's a Xamarin University instructor, flown down especially for today from Brisbane to talk to us about using Azure and working with the cloud. We'll have lunch supplied, courtesy of Xamarin, who sponsored the event. And if you haven't spotted already, this is the location is provided by JobAdder, who are also sponsoring the event. So big thanks to them and Matthew at the back for organising it all. If anyone wants to get onto the Wi-Fi, that's the password. I won't attempt to pronounce it. Something to do with a snake, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we had to think about that.
I hope it will be repeatedly.
That's the only slide I've put it on for now, but if you need it and you can't find it, then just ask. Or if you see someone taking a photo, go and hassle them later. So as well as all those balls that I threw out, there's also JobAdder themed sweets at the back. Or I was supposed to say lollies here, aren't I? And there's also boomerangs. I didn't try throwing those yet, as being expertly demonstrated by our hostess at the back. And he's armed now, so I've got to be careful. If you want to get hold of any of the material from today, you can find it at that URL. And again, if you don't manage to make a note of that now, you can just ask one of us at some point during the day or before you head off. I just spotted a Windows phone. There's two of us. Oh, sorry, everyone finished? So if you got one of the freebie bags on your way in, you'll see some Sync Fusion material in there, and I think they've got some license vouchers in there. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah.
So if you didn't get a bag on the way in, then grab one when you get a free moment. There's a big box of them. Obviously now also effectively sponsored by Microsoft, with Xamarin now being owned by Microsoft. This is going on at its own pace, isn't it? You spotted that. So this is... try and keep up with it. This is the local Xamarin user group. We meet over in North Sydney on the second Tuesday of every month. Quite a few people here are fairly regular speakers there and presenters, so we do deep dives into topic as well as some introductory sessions. So just grab one of the organisers here or come speak to me about that. And I got ahead of it there. I'm on a roll. So let's start with our introduction. How many people here are brand new to Xamarin? Excellent. Good job, we've got an introduction then. Okay, so I was wondering if I'll have to skip over any of this, but I'll work through it. As I'm going through, just shout if you've got any questions. So Xamarin's aim is to provide everything you need for your mobile development. For the complete process, not just the main Xamarin platform to build for multiple operating systems. So that they consider their development branch, if you like. They then provide Test Cloud for testing. And for those that don't know, they've got a warehouse full of physical devices in Denmark. Is it Denmark? I think it's Denmark. And you can log on to your Test Cloud account. You can deploy your app to as few or as many of those devices as you want to. Have it run. You can have your entire test run recorded. You can write codes to take screenshots during your test run. And you can go and look at a dashboard to see what your test results were. Did it pass on every device it was tested on? Did it only work on iOS and it failed on 40% of the Android devices you tried? When it comes to selecting what devices to run on as well, you can select them by hand, or you can just say top 10 by market share, or top 20 by market share, or just phones, or just tablets, or choose a specific platform. While Glenn's here, I've not looked for a while. Do you know if we're going to get Windows devices in there? Or is that a bad question?
There isn't any Windows devices at the moment. There is an open source project for Windows testing, which is compatible. It's using the JavaScript framework. So,
Okay.
it's not for test cloud, but you can use the same code and use that against iOS again.
All right. That sounds good.
The Windows one is still on
Okay.
It's also open source.
All right. Cool.
It's also based on popularity, Alec.
Not based on size, then. So obviously, you've got the development will be Xamarin Studio and the Visual Studio plugin. Testing will be Test Cloud. Building the Xamarin engine to build for the different platforms. And then distribution and monitoring. There have been a few changes here since the Microsoft buyout. So distribution, you can now use Hockey App. Well, the reason these two both came at the same time is you had to use Hockey App for both of those, whereas previously you'd have been making different plans for distribution and using Xamarin Insights or potentially Raygun or another third-party product for your analytics and in-app monitoring. So Xamarin / Microsoft / both aim to provide all those different components now for the complete life cycle. So let's talk a bit about the mobile app development process and the code you might expect to write and want to know how to structure. So this is a typical way of presenting it. If you want to, I don't know if old-fashioned is the right word, probably a bit emotive, but this shows just developing specifically for each platform. So have an Objective-C team or a Swift team for iOS, a Java team for Android, a C# team for all the Windows phones out there. There are a lot of organizations that still do this, and they end up with 3 disparate teams. They'll get 3 sets of issues, 3 lots of user testing. If one issue occurs everywhere, they've got to fix it 3 times if it happened to be a design problem, and not much in the way of, well, not really anything in the way of code sharing on the device. You would hope that they've got some design principles that mean the actual design is being shared, but again, not always the case when you've got 3 disparate teams. One of the other approaches that you'll come across is this idea of, I'll just write it once, I'll chuck it through PhoneGap, and that'll be it. It'll run everywhere. And there are arguments for doing this on occasion based on skill set that you've got available or based on whether or not you want a full native experience or if you've got some reason you just need to get something out there quickly and you've got those skills already. There are people that take that approach and then move to a native solution after that. But the bottom line here is it's a lowest common denominator experience. You can write something once and have it run everywhere, but you may well end up with someone designing the UI trying to make it look like an iPhone. And then you've got what tries to look like an iPhone app on an Android or a Windows phone. And then you've got something that on an iOS that's trying to look like an iOS app, but doesn't quite cut it. And you can't always quite put your finger on it, but the experience isn't quite there. Which is where Xamarin comes in. So what Xamarin aims to do is let you share as much of the C# code as you can, and we'll talk a bit about strategies for that as well. But that's so you'd aim to share as much of the actual guts of the app as you can, and then potentially have platform-specific user interfaces. So this is what tends to get referred to as traditional Xamarin, where you'd write code either in a portable class library or a shared project, and we'll come to that, and then have a different project in Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio one for iOS, one for Android, one for Windows, and you do your platform-specific UI in each of those. Michael's talk will go through then how to share the UI as well and still get a native experience. One of the key differences with the Xamarin approach is the access to the platform's APIs. So if you look at these typical Windows APIs, and the next ones, okay, something's not happy. Let's jump out of the presentation. Okay, bear with me a second. I think PowerPoint crashed. I'll be right with you. But what we were starting to look at there was standard APIs that you'd expect to have, and then some platform-specific ones. So there are like mobile-specific families of APIs that you'll get on the Windows platform. When it comes to what you can do on iOS, you've got these same basic APIs provided by .NET. You've also got full access to all the iOS native APIs. And one of the things that Xamarin worked very hard to do and do very well is making sure that as new APIs come out in new releases of iOS, there are mappings and equivalents provided by Xamarin. So they do, I think for a long time now, since iOS 5, they've done same-day support as each new iOS release comes out. But the key there is if you can do it in Objective-C, if you can do it in Swift, because you've got this access, you can do it in C# with Xamarin. And the same is true on Android. So there's your Android-specific APIs, and that's what that Xamarin product gives you at that level. The other thing then to point out is not just native access to all those APIs, but proper native performance. So on iOS, it does a full AOT compilation. You get a binary that you can then put straight into the Apple Store or through your enterprise distribution channels. And Xamarin Android takes the same approach as you would if you're using Java. You've got JIT compilation and then the app running natively on the device. So yeah, summary of what I've already said. This is quite an impressive list. So that's always up to date. So that's been same-day support all the way back to iOS 5, full support for all these new platforms as they appear. I often tell people when the Android Wear preview SDK was released, I was checking my emails just before I fell asleep, and I saw an email come in saying invitation to download the preview SDK, and I thought, oh, brilliant, I'll have a look at that tomorrow. I woke up the next morning, there's an email from Xamarin. Xamarin supports the Android Wear SDK preview. So they move very, very quickly. Any questions on that so far? So I'll take a bit of a look at the development experience now, including what always used to be the sticking point of pricing. So Xamarin is now included in Visual Studio, including the Community Edition, which is free. So you can get off the ground for no financial outlay now. Usual restrictions apply to using Community Edition. I think there's limits on the number of employees you can have if you're a company, and then you're supposed to be going through your standard Microsoft licensing, like MSDN subscription. But this does mean the man in the street can, or the programmer in the street, can get off the ground without having a massive outlay required, except possibly a Mac, but there's alternatives to that as well. So this is just showing how integrated it is now with Visual Studio. As part of the standard Visual Studio installation, if you choose Custom, you can then go and enable cross-platform mobile development. So I don't think you'll get it unless you go into Custom and choose it, but it is there. and that will then go and do the download for you. Now, you saw a bit earlier I had that nice big box with C# in it and then a different color box for each of the platforms to put your native UI code. So when it comes to actually creating that UI layer, you've got an Android designer built into Visual Studio. So you can lay out your Android screens nicely. You'll get your XML here and your layouts defined, and you can go and edit those at the native level. And then when it comes to testing, you can now use the Android emulator, again, that you get with Visual Studio. It was always the case that the Windows, well, I always found, I'm a little bit biased, you might be able to tell, but I always found the Windows Phone emulator that bit better than some of the alternatives, just in terms of being able to what you can do with location and fake calls and fake this, that, and the other. Craig would probably like to step in and tell me that Genymotion can do it all, I'm guessing. Or not?
No, I'm leaning towards what you're saying more now.
All right. Okay,
The
cool.
Genymotion is still quite a good alternative.
It is. It is. Oh. Okay. That's busy demoing. I didn't realise I clicked start, but let's let it go anyway. So there's an iOS designer, again, built into Visual Studio, that lets you set up your storyboards and lay out your iOS interfaces as though you were doing it natively. Those who've tried to do this through Xcode, some of this should look familiar, except it puts a nice layer in and kind of C-sharpifies it and .netifies it for you when it comes to adding events to things. So you've got support for all the UIKit elements, so that's in line with full access to the native APIs, full access to all the user interface controls on both platforms. A good selection of third-party libraries and components. And also, if you're coming from iOS land and you already have favorite iOS components, native iOS components that you want to use, there are ways to create a Xamarin wrapper for those and bring them in and use them from a Xamarin solution. This, I saw this demoed for the first time at Evolve. So this is running an iOS simulator on a Windows PC. Now it's actually remoting out to the build host and effectively giving you a session looking at a simulator on a Mac. But where I've seen that work very nicely is when devs have got a nice beefy PC that they're developing on, and it's touch screen. Suddenly you can actually use touch in an emulator on your iOS projects, and there's no way to do that in Apple land. And yeah, the idea is you can do it all from within Visual Studio. So we talked about Visual Studio so far, and if you're a Visual Studio fan, then that's all fantastic. And if Visual Studio always hangs together and never gets upset with any of its little components, then you're happy. In practice, you'll need to know about this at the very least. So this is Xamarin Studio, runs on the Mac. And this is designed to, well, basically you don't need Visual Studio to use Xamarin. If you're running on a Mac, then you can bring this up. You can do your iOS development and your Android development to your heart's content. You can't do a Windows Phone in Xamarin Studio on the Mac. You need to be on a Windows machine for that.
Also, the solution can be used in Visual Studio as well. So
Yes, yes, that's true. And if you think you might want to support Windows, then you would create the solution in Visual Studio, which will give you a Windows project as part of the solution. You can then open that on in Xamarin Studio. You just limit it to what you can do with the actual Windows project. But again, if you're sharing your code, you've got either a portable class library or a shared project, you can happily edit all that from either side, from either IDE. Does anyone here use Xamarin Studio regularly? If you do end up using this, or you are using it already, then you really need to chat to Matthew from job adder about mfractor, which is an add-in that he's written that is really, really top notch. You can think of it as ReSharper for Xamarin Studio. It adds an awful lot of functionality. So one of the other big developments that came about the same time as the Microsoft announcement was the open sourcing of Xamarin. So if you want to go and dive into the code and see how they've done what they've done, you can now go to open.xamarin.com. You can go browse the iOS code, browse the Android code. And in addition to the full platform being open source, Xamarin Forms, which Michael will be delving into, is now also open source. So any questions before I dive into code sharing?
The emulator is any the RAM requirement? Because I tried to learn this on my laptop, which is failed. I think maybe there's limited RAM on the laptop. So any requirement for the RAM to learn the emulator?
I know on a virtual machine you have to have Hyper-V enabled because it's using that. And there was a time when, Glenn, you might want to, is he still there? Yeah, I might defer that question. There was a point where I could only deploy to an emulator if I had a Wi-Fi connection from the Mac. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
No, I said the RAM requirement got some 8 gig or 16 gig.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an official limit, David.
There's no official limit, but it depends whether you're using a Macintosh to do the development or you're using Visual Studio.
No, it's a Windows. It's
Okay.
a Microsoft desktop.
Okay.
Windows 10, and I tried to learn the emulator in the Visual Studio, and it's a fail.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
some RAM limit, I think.
Well, anecdotally, people have told me that Visual Studio really needs a minimum of 16 gigs to run just itself.
Okay.
And if you want to do anything else, you're going to need more. I can't say definitely that that's true, but I'm saving up for a laptop and it's going to have at least 16 gigs in it.
I've got 16 on this. I've got a Windows virtual machine that has 8 allocated to it, and I can use the emulator on that. It would work better with more RAM, and I think if I went any less than 8, it just wouldn't work. Yeah.
And Hyper-V has been enabled too.
Yes.
That can
Yes,
cause-
Yes.
the emulator itself, like I feel it's like you have to do a lot of settings and like to make it work, and I still can't make it work the emulator. I can't make it work with the real device. I wrote the sample app and I can't test it actually because finally this morning I could bring up the emulator but my app is not showing there and I'm like myself what to do after this.
Okay. All right. Well, someone will sit with you this afternoon and hopefully fix that.
It's all part of the fun.
Yes. Yeah. So let's look a bit at strategies for sharing code. So how many people have used or know what portable class libraries are? Okay, that's good. So this would be a project within your solution, compiles down to a DLL, and that DLL can actually sit on the different platforms, whatever was selected as a target platform here. So one of the ways that you can share code between platforms in a solution that's using Xamarin is put as much code as possible into a portable class library, and then you'd have your platform projects, an iOS project, an Android project, and you'd all have a Windows project, I'm sure, all referencing the portable class library for all the business logic. I'm going to ignore all those laughs at the back. You can also make use of NuGet packages, open source ones and ones that are available for you to bring down into your solutions, as well as using this as a model for creating your own NuGet packages for common functionality if you're in an organization. Set up your own server and have different components distributed to your teams that way and share code between projects as well as between platforms. Now there is an alternative to portable class libraries, which I know at least one person in here favours. There might be more. So this, if you create a shared project, how many of you use shared projects? There he is. So you have a shared project in your solution, the same as a pullable class library, and you have reference to it from your platform project, but the shared project never gets compiled in its own right. It's just brought in at compile time into whatever project you're compiling. So it's like including files or linking in files, depending on what other platforms that you've used. That means that you can have pre-compiler directives around bits of code, and you can be doing platform-specific things within your shared project. And sometimes there are good reasons to want to do that. Sometimes you can come unstuck because you're doing it a bit too much and your code gets a bit messy. But yeah, that is another solution. And there are some specific places where I think portable class library fans would say a shared project is appropriate. This is just showing some example apps of how much code was shared between different platforms for apps that are actually out there. So this is some stats provided by Xamarin. If we look at iCircuit, which obviously is the only one worth considering, on Android, they were using 86% of shared code, and had to, of the total solution, 14% was specific to the platform. iOS was a bit more specific to the platform, presumably because there was some fancy UI stuff going on. The Mac version, they did 12% platform-specific code, and then Windows Phone, 10%. So you can see the amount of code that's shared. It does vary. It is going to vary, but those are all decently high figures for the amount of code that you write once and then use across all your platforms. But it's also key, I think at least, to bear in mind that for all of these, however small it is, there is a little bit. If you want your app to completely fly on whatever platform you're writing it for, and really make the most of the fact that you can write a native app using Xamarin, then you want to put a bit of effort in to make sure it fits in and keeps up with the other apps people have on their devices.
What's the utility we use to get these statistics?
That is a good question. I have seen it. I can't remember it, so I could probably find out. I've tried the ones built into Visual Studio, and they just get very confused. So again, looking at a little bit at structure, we've talked about having a shared C# backend, if you like, so portable class library or a shared project, and your platform-specific bits, however big that is. So what might you need to put in there? Well, these things are all done slightly differently on platforms. How do you find out how much battery life is left? How do you interact with location services? How do you handle notifications, jump out to settings, or do text-to-speech? There are ways of doing those things on all platforms, but you have to do it slightly differently, and you have to do it at a platform-specific level. So if you were sticking to that structure that we just had, you'd have common code in your PCL or your shared project, and this would go in the platform-specific section. But the question now is, wouldn't it be nice to not have to write that platform-specific code, because they are standard things that we want to do on every platform, and that every platform is capable of doing. So it's nice if you can just hook straight into that from your shared code, whether it's a shared project or a portable class library. So this is one example to look at, looking at text-to-speech. So how would we get the device to actually say, "Hello world"? If you go and take a look at github.com/Xamarin/plugins, you'll find a whole host of plugins that have been written for Xamarin, where someone's looked at a problem like this text-to-speech and said, well, that can be done on all platforms. There's no sense everybody writing that code on every platform every time they want to do it. I'll write and publish a plugin. You download the plugin, you'll get that platform code, you'll get a standard way of calling it from your shared code, and that as a developer of an app, that's all you need to do. So you can go and have a look through the plugins that are available and save yourself a lot of effort writing some of that platform-specific code.